Hello, everyone, and welcome to our March 2023 BingeBooks Book Club chat. I am joined today by A.L. Knorr, and also known as Abby, and we're going to be talking all about Blossom at Midnight, the first book in the Scented Court series, as well as her other books. So welcome, Abby. It's so great to have you. And this is not a normal time for a book club chat. We normally are in the afternoon. But we are battling time zones because you're in Turkey. So right. welcome from afar. I've never been to Turkey, but your worlds are so alive and vibrant and varied. So I'm curious, and we won't jump right into it. But at some point, I'd love to know, where you get the inspiration for your books. But before we go into that, do you just want to give the audience just kind of a quick introduction to you and your writing?
Sure. So my name's Abby, but as you mentioned, I write under AL, and I started writing in the beginning of 2016 and published my first book at the end of the year, and never really looked back after that. I've been nurturing the dream of being a writer since I could read, which was really early age. My mom taught me when I was 3, literally. And I was always better with letters than I was with numbers. So that was the dream. And I'm very happy that readers seem to be receptive to my style of storytelling, and I'm just churning out books as quickly as I'm physically able ever since then.
I love that, and I love that you wanted to be a writer from the beginning. So it's always different, kind of how everyone finds their path to being an author. So when you said you started writing in 2016, published in 2017, was it like you graduated high school, you hit the ground running towards being a writer? I don't know how old you are, but you look young. I mean, so did you have another career before you started writing?
Yes, I did. I love that you think I was in high school when I started. I had a full career already. I'm 45. I just turned 45 this month. And I had, my personality type is one of those Peter Pan personality types where I'm interested in all kinds of topics. And in fact, my press is called Intellectually Promiscuous Press because of that reason. Because I was like, what should I write? I like everything. So I didn't know exactly, how my career was going to kind of funnel, but I, was interested in a broad scope of topics. So I chose that name. And prior to writing, I had worked for 8 years as a marketing director for a bath and body company in Canada that I absolutely loved, in Canmore, Alberta, which is just kind of in the Rockies there, in a very beautiful kind of touristy location. And I had left that to travel, and I was in Italy at the time, and I was researching because I had kind of freelance contracts that I was doing part-time, but I was researching. I knew I wanted to do something entrepreneurial, and I didn't know that self-publishing was a viable option. And I had always wanted to be an author, but I always felt the gatekeepers were too high. I just couldn't get through them. And it was very difficult and a long process. It would take years. If you could even get an agent interested, then, to sell the work to a buyer, you had to do it all up front and make it really perfect. And I was really tapped out mentally with my job because it was quite intense. And so I knew that if I continued to work down that path, I would never make my dream a reality. So I went to a country where I didn't speak the language, which was Italy. I lived in northern Italy for a little while. I listened to podcasts, and I tried to decide, what am I going to do with myself? And I stumbled across the Smart Passive Income podcast in an interview with Michael Landerly. And the minute I heard his story, I was blown away. I was like, you write vampires in space for a living? I was like, that's amazing.
And make money. Yeah.
And you do really well at it. And so for literally in a span of 5 minutes, I went from what am I going to do to that's what I'm doing. And so I let my freelance contracts go. I took a full year to kind of set up my strategy, how to launch, what to write. I had always had an obsession with nautical history, mermaids, shipwrecks, anything to do with the oceans and seas. And so I already had a story in mind for a mermaid story. And so I started writing that, not knowing what I was doing at all, really.
So have you ever written a book before? Had you ever taken a creative writing class?
Yeah, I've taken a few creative writing classes when I was younger, and I had always scribbled stories for myself, but never for public consumption. And when the first time you go down the road of writing a story, you think, you just sit down and you start with an idea. The idea is like the easiest part, and you're so inspired. This is also my personality flaw, is that I get captured by ideas and I get so excited and enthusiastic, and then I run down that road. And then when it gets hard, I stop and then get distracted by something sparkly over there.
Another great idea.
Another great idea, exactly.
Even better.
And
Yeah.
then you never finish anything. So I took a personality test when I had been working at my corporate job, and I discovered, oh, that's why I've never been able to finish a story, because this is my personality flaw, like one of many. And so I realized that if I didn't overcome that, I would never manage to, achieve my dreams. So I had to get over that hump, which is like, when it gets hard, you work hard. You just bite the bullet and you do it. You figure it out, and then in retrospect, you get help from people who know more than you about how to, make the story great. And I did that. And I wrote 2.5 books and published nothing for a year while I was just researching and building my website laboriously behind the scenes, because I'm not great at technology. Managed that, and then published a little short story just to see if I could manage the dashboard. And I got through that okay. That was the end of December 2016. Published the first book, had the second book almost ready for pre-order, third book half written. And in my first month, I managed to surprise myself with a modest 4-figure income in that first month. I was like, this is going to work. I have a great feeling. And my goal became replace my corporate income in the first month. And then maybe you can make this work. Maybe you can tell stories for a living. And somehow incredibly, it worked out. And it's literally my dream job. I just cannot think of a more appropriate job for my personality type and my imagination. And yeah, so that was the beginning of it. And
so I just to drill down 2 things. First of all, like what you described, starting a book and then you get into it. And for a lot of authors, we had Dean Koontz on another BingeBooks chat, and he said, something that I just love because it resonated with me is that like he hates the book, like half in, he's like, oh, this is horrible. Where is it going? What am I doing? I'm a horrible writer. No one's going to enjoy this, and that resonates with so many. I think for me, it's just part of the creative process. And now I just know, oh, this is the portion of the book where I think it's the worst thing ever. And like you said, when it gets hard, you just work harder. I love that. But is that really kind of what you did, like with that first book, with those first few books, is when you got a shiny, sparkly idea, do you allow yourself to indulge in it a little bit, or do you just like bat it to the side and keep going?
Yeah, no, I grabbed, the idea had been with me for such a long time, and it took me 9 months. Okay, maybe that doesn't seem like very long to write a book, because a book can take however long you allow it to take. But it took me 9 months to write it. And for somebody, an indie especially, you know how important it is to be quick. And I was like, this is hard. Like, I've never done anything harder than this. And the ending was terrible. And I was like, this is not satisfying. Why didn't I think of this beforehand? And then I realized, I'm an outliner. Maybe I should think about that before I start writing and putting all these hours in. But in the end, I shared it with my editor, who was not Nicola at the time. It was a different lady. And she wrote back with an email. And I remember my palms were sweaty. I was shaking. Like, I opened the email and the first line said, "Did you know that you're a writer?" And I burst into tears. I was bawling. I was just like, it didn't suck so bad. Yeah, it was just that encouragement I needed. And of course, it's like, red marks everywhere. And I was like, that's great. Like, tell me how to fix this and make it great. And she did. And thankfully, readers responded to it, even though since then I've since taken that book back and also polished it and made it even better, because you learn so much through, like you say, you've been through this so many times now. There's going to be a point, which actually I addressed in my newsletter today. I'm at the point with the book I'm writing currently where I think it's pretty terrible and nobody's going to like it. And imposter syndrome sets in. And what am I doing? This is going to break my career and blah, blah, blah. But I know logically, this is going to pass with hard work. It just takes polishing and going over it and getting feedback and making it better and using every last minute that you have to make it as great as it can be. And then once you release it to the wild, you've done all that you could. And, usually, well, so far, thankfully, my readers are kind. It worked out.
And since 2017, so in 5-6 years, now it took you 9 months to write that first book, but now how long does it take you to write a book?
Yeah. So I went through a little process where it's like, how fast can I write a book? So I did the first one in 9 months, the second one in 6 months, the third one in 3 months, the fourth one in 1 month. And then I was like, that's too fast. I'm hurting. My body is hurting. I have TOS. My arms are turning blue, like literally in the middle of the night, I would wake up and they would be blue. Like that's okay. Back off a bit. So now I can write a story, my length of story, which originally I started around 75,000 words in about 2 months. That's a decent pace for me. But now, like with these fat suckers, which are twice the length, they take more than twice the work. Like this, it's a lot of work, as you know.
Yeah.
Those ones have taken me around 5 months to write, to a point where I'm happy with them, and they don't embarrass me when I push them out the nest.
And I see we have a question from Patricia, who's joining us from YouTube. She says, how do you manage your characters, their personalities, links to other characters, etc.? So can we talk a little bit about characters and how you create characters and
Yeah,
names?
absolutely. So the characters that I created in my first series, which is a 6-book series, but the first 5 books are nonlinear. You can enter that series at any point, because each of those, it's 5 girls. 4 of them know each other. One of them doesn't, but they all go to school together. They're all going somewhere different for their summer vacation, and each story takes place over that summer. So each time you pick up,
what's the name of that series, just so we can link it?
The Elemental Origins series.
Okay.
So it started with the mermaid story, which is called Born of Water. And as I was writing that, I was like, I can turn this into an elemental magic series with Born of Fire, Born of Earth, Born of Air, Born of Ether. And so those came along after I wrote the first book, actually. I didn't realize that it was going to turn into an elemental magic series. But I did that strategically because I wanted all the girls to be texting each other during the story and giving hints that something was happening in their lives, but that the girls were not totally transparent with each other, even though they're best friends, because what was happening with them was supernatural. And they were a bit like, this is crazy. They're not going to believe me. So those characters, they became like foundational characters in my universe. And then, readers loved them so much that I continued to write for each individual girl, and that became spin-off series. And I have a wonderful editor who's also a fan who tracks everything in Aeon for me, like it's a chronology software. So she she's called persnickety. So which I really appreciate, because she's very attention to detail. She puts all the details of the stories into this Aeon chronology so that I can go in and look like this was happening at this time while this girl was doing that. And so that keeps track of like consistency issues, which can happen really easily, especially when you're doing layered series like that and it's not linear. And then,
so are all of these books in this series all happening at the same time?
The first 5, yeah.
Okay. So they're all happening in the same span of time, but you're having to, as an author, not give away plot lines or outcomes of things that are happening. I mean, this is very difficult, actually. Like,
yeah, it wasn't easy
brain to compute.
Yeah, most like linear series, you leave a hook at the end of the first book to entice the reader into the second story. With this, I couldn't do that. I had to use a different way to try and hook readers into continuing the series, especially because the 5 girls they're telling their own story, and you've just fallen in love with Targa. You're not interested in reading a story about her friend Saxony or Georgia. You want to know what's happening with Targa. So that was really challenging. Because I had to find a way to get readers to like those other characters, even though they weren't actually in the story. They were only in the story with text messages and a bit of backstory, and the girls, meeting up with each other at the very beginning to say goodbye, that kind of thing. So that was super tricky to manage. In retrospect, I'm not really sure how I did that, but it somehow worked out.
And when did you write this? Did you write all 5 books and then start the spinoff series, or would you write like The Mermaid and write all of her books and then
Yeah, I wrote the first 5 books of those 5 characters first and published them throughout 2017 and the beginning of 2018. And then I wrote a 6th book that brought all those girls together. So they have a story where they all band together, and it's very satisfying. It's actually like readers tell me it's their favorite story because they get to see all of them in action together, and their story lines tie together. And then after that book launched and people were still asking me for more of those characters, I was like, well, okay, I'll go back and I'll write a trilogy for Targa, and that was the mermaid. And then I went and wrote an Academy series for Saxony, which was the fire girl character. She got 5 books. And then my Fae character, who was born of Earth, she got 3 books. And I still owe readers 2 spin-off stories for the 2 other girls, but I got, inspired to do this series by doing those ones, because this is like a portal fantasy that's linked it's like in an epic fantasy world, but it's connected to this universe that I had created, which readers loved. And they loved, like, the Earth magic one is set in Ireland. These girls all go to somewhere different. I'm a big traveler, and I really wanted to incorporate international settings. And I love Ireland. I have Irish roots. I did Irish dancing for years. And so they love that, like, fairies and the green of Ireland and ghosts and like kind of this creepy vibe, and flowers and fairies that grow these little cocoons and stuff, and they loved it. So I grabbed that idea and I just expanded it, and that's how this series of The Scented Court came about, because it's all about fae with connections to pollinators, with magic over a specific botanical, which just went deeper and deeper into that kind of universe's lore, which is what readers had asked me for. So 2 years later, I'm on the 4th book of this monster series. Like, I hope you appreciate this.
Let's talk about this book a little bit, because that is one of the reasons why we're here. So for someone who's watching who hasn't read this book yet, can you give kind of an elevator, pitch, or, a description of this book without, and we always are spoiler free. So,
right.
Of this world and of this book or the series.
Yeah. So this
no
is
small feat, because it's not.
Don't ask much.
Yeah.
So this story, this series, The Scented Court, using the word court gives readers a clue, because there's so many series with the word court in it that tips you off that it's fae. So it's in a fae universe and an epic fantasy universe that's connected to ours, but you actually very, very little crisscrossing between our universe and this universe. And it follows 3 main characters who at the very beginning don't know each other at all. One is a country girl who is kind of snapped up in this glamorous fae retinue that works for the queen. And her, she gets sucked into this world of 50 very special fae, flora fae, that each have a pollinator, and their magic is connected to a very specific botanical. And their magic entertains the wealthiest country in this continent, the wealthiest kingdom in this continent. And their secret to their fame and the wealth of the country is to do with their perfumes that they manufacture, which they do in a very unconventional way. And then the other characters are, one is originally from the Earth series that I wrote. People really love this character. He's a male named Laic, and he is in disgrace at the beginning, and he goes on a commission to this kingdom. And on the way, he meets the 3rd character. So these 3 characters, their stories intertwine, though they don't know each other at the beginning. And you start to see how their backstories are actually affected by one another and how they have to band together. They're from completely different worlds, but they end up, kind of undertaking some heroic, incredible feats, and intertwined with that is, of course, some beautiful, like, romance threads. It's not a typical fantasy romance in that the romance is the main thread. I always have romance, but it's never the main. I prefer courtly intrigue, adventure, danger, things like that, and relationships between characters. So those are all, like, friendships are a big theme in my stories, especially between women and between mothers and daughters. Those relationships can be really fraught as well. So that was not an elevator pitch. That was a bit extended.
it was really, really good. And so how did the idea of this come about? Did you start like with the world, or did you start with a specific plot line, or what?
I had the world, like when I wrote the series, the Born of Earth character, her name is Georgiana. When I wrote her series, because she gets a trilogy that's set in Ireland, she is able, because she's part fae, she's able to witness the birth of new fairies, which happens when a drop of water is penetrated by sunlight, and it becomes this little translucent tiny cocoon on the underside of a leaf that most people aren't aware of. And that is a connection to this larger fae world that she now has access to, and she visits it as part of the story. So that became, if you imagine like Holly Black's world, like, the fairy is the place where the characters go, and there's all this drama and intrigue and politics and everything happening in this Fae kingdom where there's so much magic. And the readers really liked that world that I created. And I hadn't intended to expand it, but because that was what they were asking for, I was like, okay, I can do that. And then I really dove into kind of the mythology that I had started developing and dug deeper, like how do these connections work? Why are these Fae connected to these botanicals, and how is the magic accessed, and what's the benefit for the kingdom? And in a very practical way. Like there's not so much magic that things seem easy and people can zip here and there and there. It's still very grounded. But I had to buy like a huge dictionary of botanical names and nomenclature, and like look up like what pollinators are attracted to those plants, and all that. There's a lot of research that actually went into it, which I really enjoyed. So it kind of just expanded organically, I guess, off of this other series that I had created initially.
Oh my gosh. And like, I'm not a fantasy reader. This is one of the first, fantasy books I've read in ages. So is like what you just talked about, like the drop of water, like the creation of did you invent that, or that's in every fantasy book and it's like a common way?
Yeah, I invented that. I thought if Fae were real, I'm not saying they ain't, but how would they come about? And so I thought, one day, I don't remember, I think I was in Italy, and I remember seeing beautiful, clear dewdrops on the underside of roses. Like there's so many roses that grow up in Trentino, yellow and red. They're just stunning. And when the sunlight comes through there, something special happens. Like it turns into a jewel. And I thought, what if you take that a little further, and that actually creates a teeny tiny little fairy whose job then, after they're hatched, is to, contribute to Mother Nature and heal illness like within the earth and help things grow and all that, right? So that was like the wee folk part of my mythology. These Fae are different in that they procreate the same way we do. They're just as big as us, if not taller, like more like the elves kind of from like the Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, more elfin. But there's also both worlds, like the wee Fae and these larger Fae, who are much more relatable to us as human beings, which is what I wanted to keep, because I think there's a value in the reader being easily able to slip into that world themselves and, not have to imagine themselves as something vastly different from what they already are, if that makes sense.
It does. We have another question. This one's also from YouTube, from JD. And he said, you're such a good writer and a great storyteller. How difficult was it to learn the specific tropes and conventions of stories in your genre? Do you think you'll ever write novels in a different genre? So let's kind of work on the first one first. And for readers who might not know what tropes or conventions are, I guess a more dumbed down way of asking that, I don't mean to say dumbed down, but is to kind of say, how familiar were you already with fantasy writing and with everything involved? And like, I didn't even know what Fae was when I started reading this story. That's how out of it I was. But how difficult was it for you to learn about building blocks of fantasy stories?
That's a great question. And thank you for the compliment, JD. I think there was, because I was a voracious reader and fantasy was my chosen genre to read when I was younger. It's not now, but it was then. And I just consumed so much. I was such a bookworm. I think my trope understanding was not conscious. It was actually unconscious, because I had tropes that I loved, but I didn't realize they were tropes. Like I love old haunted buildings, like manors that have been, kind of left into ruin and disheveled, and there's secrets there, and secret staircases and back rooms and dangerous dungeons and things like that. That's one of my things that I'm attracted to. I love twins. I love triplets. I tend to write about triplets for some reason. I love nature, and drawing from my love of nature is very easy to slip into the Fae universe. So I think I also love secret baby. Like that's one of my favorite tropes, and I had no idea it was a trope up until recently, actually. So I would say my education about that came organically as I absorbed what it was like in this day and age to be an author and the things that you had to be aware of. But I never wrote to tropes specifically with intention. I did it because I just like that. I just like those things, that I wanted to write about the things I love. Shipwrecks, like mermaids,
mermaids. Yeah.
specific things that a subset of readers are really attracted to, thankfully, not just me. And so to take those things and turn it into a story was a very easy kind of organic thing that happened. And only now, like especially in the last several years, I'm like, okay, tropes are important. And as you know, for his other question, I would love to write novels in another genre. I love historical fiction. That's my chosen. And actually, I love literary fiction too. Like I'm reading a Ken Follett book right now, and I'm totally sucked in, and I can't put it down. I'm like, this is amazing. I just love this story so much. So I actually don't read that much in my own genre anymore. But I think all those years, because I write YA, I'm writing, aiming at a younger audience. Although majority of my readers are actually adults, and a lot of them are retired, and they're just like, I just love this genre because YA is a genre, and you think that it's targeting teenagers. But actually, it's just targeting people who love to read stories about young people who haven't solidified anything in their life yet. They haven't found a life partner and a path, a vocation, and they're full of hormones, and they're fighting with their family. There's school dramas, and like there's so much. It's just a rich genre to mine for content. So yeah, I think it kind of happened for me naturally, and I was lucky in that the genres or the tropes that I like are in fact enjoyed by quite a lot of readers.
I love that. Patricia from YouTube said, will there be more of, now I'm afraid to say any names. Is it Gemma?
Yes, Gemma. Oh my goodness. I'm shocked that she would ask that. Why?
For those of you, for the audience who doesn't know, can you tell us just a little bit about who Gemma is?
And yes. Gemma is a secondary character, a very small secondary character in this story, in this series. She's the sister of one of the main characters named Chifta, which is a name I probably regret choosing, but I like it. Gemma's her sister, and she's scandalous. She's absolutely scandalous. She's like shameless flirt, cheating on her husband. Her husband knows this, and he's okay with it. But she's. I guess she struck a nerve with somebody, Patricia.
Sounds really interesting to me. So yeah. So do you think there will be more of her?
Well, there will be more of her in the final book in the series. I can say that much.
And already that there's only going to be 4 books in the series. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. These books are much longer than my typical fare. They're over 100,000 words more, some 120 even. Which is a huge amount of words for me. And in my genre, most books are between 65 and 75, as I mentioned. So I lean more towards contemporary fantasy anyways. I like contemporary settings. And this was my kind of dream to flex my muscles in an epic setting, but I am going to be going back to contemporary after that with shorter books. So it's going to get quicker after this one kills me.
Did you know that these books were going to be this long? I mean, when you outlined them out, were you like, oh my gosh, this is going to be 120,000 words? And did you think about splitting them at any point?
Only in retrospect. Like initially, I knew they were going to be long. I set out with the objective to make a very lush, epic world that readers who love that can get lost in. And the way that I did that was by those extra characters. Like normally I follow one character and it's first person, but this I follow 3 characters and it's third person. And each of them, has a story that is quite developed in terms of backstory, and that naturally expanded. So it was kind of like writing 3 books and then weaving them together to create this extra long kind of epic length experience. And I really wanted to do something that would look beautiful on the shelf for fans of this kind of, because Fae is something that kind of took off in the last few years. And the opportunity to create such beautiful covers like this one, like the flowers and everything. I just love the cover. I'm like, I need to.
I like how different everyone is too. Like,
yeah.
Each of these covers.
It was like I have to tick this box because I have the idea. I really want to flex my muscles with something that's longer and more in depth. And now I've done that and I'm almost finished it. And I feel really satisfied with it. And my bread and butter fare, my wheelhouse is really contemporary fantasy. And I learned that by writing this, which I enjoyed every minute of it, but I'm missing the contemporary setting that I have with the other characters. And I am looking forward to going back to that.
So another question, someone asked, where did the familiars come from? What was your inspiration and their inception? Like the wee folk and the dewdrops. Can you talk about the familiars? And this was another concept I wasn't familiar with, was the familiars. Did you invent the idea of familiars, or is
No,
that a common?
yeah, that's actually that's a trope.
That's a trope. Okay.
Yeah, it's a fairly common trope, and I think, don't quote me on this because I could be wrong about that, but I think it came from the cozy mystery genre where, um, you know, sleuths that are also witches often have a familiar, and usually it's a black cat, and the cat sometimes has abilities, sometimes not, but they have a really strong bond. And I love the way. First of all, I love animals. Second of all, I love the ability to communicate telepathically between two people with having a conversation that nobody else is part of, because it gives you so much opportunity for humor and for you get that extra dimension as a reader. So these fae characters, there's a group of flora fae which are connected to pollinators, so they're connected to insects. Butterflies, bees, wasps, hornets, anything that's a pollinator. And then there's fauna fae, which are connected to animals, mammals. And their level of bond or the level of connection varies by fae. Some are really deep and they can communicate telepathically and they can share their vision, like remote viewing. So my main character, she's connected to a bumblebee bat, which is both pollinator and just a mammal. And he's tiny. It's the tiniest bat in the world, and it's a real species. And he's very clever. Like, he's far too clever for something so tiny. And he's able to spy. They end up being spies because they have this ability to sneak around, and he can show her what he's seeing, crawl through cracks, and spy on people and spy on the other kingdom that's their enemy and that kind of thing. So I didn't come up with that idea of familiars. That's been around for quite a long time, but I would like to think I expanded it and took it deeper, but I don't know that that's true because I think a lot of authors have maybe done that. And I unfortunately cannot actually give away how they're created because it's a secret.
I have to say, when I first read about the first appearance of a bat, which happens very, very early on in the book, at first I was like, oh, because to me bats are like scary and creepy and gross. Right. So I actually looked up like bumblebee bats, and cute is a strong word, but I developed an affection for bats, but I have to say, initially I was like, oh my God, a bat. Like, I don't know, like a bat. Have you, in all your travels, have you seen bats?
Oh yeah. I grew up on a farm and we had bats. We lived in a huge log cabin that had all kinds of cracks and crevices. And we had bats in our kind of attic. Once in a while, we'd have to deal with them. But I love animals, and for some reason, I've always liked bats. I don't really know why, because they are kind of on the creepy side, and they carry diseases and things like that. So they're not exactly something you'd want to snuggle. But I think they're amazing because they're
like a snuggly character. Like in this book, like it worked for me. It was just interesting.
If there's one thing I can feel proud of, is that I changed your viewpoint on bats. Yeah. So the little bat, Beazle, he ended up becoming even a bigger character than I expected him to be, because by book 2, their magic and their bond really develops, and he begins to share his thoughts with her. And you learn that he's very witty and very funny and sly, and he's very kind of loving and warm-hearted as well. And he's just, I guess, I always think writing fantasy is like wish fulfillment. Like, I always wish that I could be a mermaid, and in order to do that, I had to write a story about it. And having a pet bat is kind of a cool idea for me, because I've always liked them. They're like flying sonar. Like, how cool is that? So I guess it was a bit of fantasy fulfillment on my part, and I'm really glad that not everybody is grossed out by him.
No, and I think it depends on where, like, in my mind, bats are like Dracula, and like, they're like piranhas that are all going to like attack me and suck my blood and kill me, and I think it's just being around. I had pet rats at one point in my life, and so I have an affection towards rats, but I understand why a lot of people would think rats are gross and disgusting. Right. like,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
so I could see, I totally get it. So we are out of time. If anyone has any final questions, now is your last opportunity to ask them. But we do have some winners. So with every Binge Books book club, we do try to give winners, and Abby was kind enough to give away 3 books, 3 signed books. And do you have a copy of the book plates? The book plates in these signed books is gorgeous. So this is going to be, yeah, look how beautiful that is. And are these the same for all of your books? That's a consistent book plate you use?
Yeah, this is a new thing I just had designed, and I followed the theme of the scented court with the pollinators and the flowers, and kind of just made it really simple.
Yeah, that's why I asked, because it fits this book so perfectly.
Yeah. I left a bit of room in case somebody wants to like put their name or whatever here. I just kind of signed it down here.
So huge congrats to Neil, Rosalind, and Christina. So thank you so much for entering. And if you're interested in entering future BingeBooks book clubs or attending book club events, just follow us at bingebooks.com. You can create an account there and visit our book club tab. So we've got some exciting events coming up. I know you guys are going to be interested in those. And again, Abby, if they would like to read this book or any of your books, we have your website here. So there it is, alknorbooks.com. And obviously we have this book, Blossom Midnight. If they're interested in another book, is there any other book that you highly recommend that readers start with?
I always love to suggest Born of Water, the first book that I ever wrote, because it won an award in Miami, so I know it doesn't completely roast. And it's usually a nice introduction to my universe. And if people like that story, then they'll want to experience more.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us today, Abby. Thank you for everyone who joined us on YouTube and Facebook, and check out bingebooks.com for more book club events. We will see you all in a couple weeks with our next event. Thank you so much, Abby.
Thank you.